If you're listening to this and you haven't visited luchacentral.com, it's time to do it. luchacentral.com is the online home for Lucha Libre, where you can get all of the top news in English and in Spanish. Find the best curated video content and original content not seen anywhere else. Find when Lucha Libre events would be happening in your area. Find photo galleries from top photographers covering Lucha Libre around the world. From weekly polls to annual awards. Seen and read by top executives in all of the major Lucha Libre promotions across the globe. And on top of that, it's free. luchacentral.com, your centralized place for all things Lucha Libre.
You are listening to the Lucha Central Podcast Network. And now, luchacentral.com presents The Business of the Business.
I want to thank everybody for joining us on this second season now of Business of the Business, where we'll talk about the licensing and merchandising side of professional wrestling and other industries. And today's guest is probably someone who has the dream job for a lot of listeners. I think as a fan of wrestling from my youth to today, action figures have always been a part of that world. I think that we've gone through a number of eras where we've had more figures or better figures or less figures. And, throughout the last decades, while the Impact and wrestling lines have come and gone, and this line has come and gone, the one consistent line through all of it has been the fact that WWE has had action figures from the time I was a child, and many people listening were, to today. And so I'm really excited right now to have joining me Steve Ozer, who is at Mattel and is the Associate Marketing Manager for the WWE line. Like I mentioned, probably the dream job for a lot of people listening, or a lot of people that grew up or are currently wrestling fans. So Steve, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
So I want to, I don't know how many interviews you do. Obviously I've watched a lot of your social media and your videos that you've made on your Action Figure Attack social media accounts. And, but the first question that I think everybody listening is going to have is, how did you end up in this job? How did you end up not only working in the toy industry, which is cool in and of itself, but what was your journey to become the WWE marketing manager, associate WWE marketing manager at Mattel? Take us back. Where, I guess, before we even start your journey in the workplace, take me back to when you were younger. Was your obsession with action figures something that started as a kid? And what was it that you collected as a kid?
I'm glad you backtracked a little with the question, because I was going to say, wow, we're going to start with the longest answer first here. But, as a kid, a child of the 80s, grew up in the golden age of action figures, really, like so many mega brands that are still iconic today, and being a huge fan of them. And the biggest of them all for me was WWE, WWF at the time, obviously. Back with the LJN figures and the Hasbro figures. So yeah, I've always been a fan and collector, after the play years ended, collector probably since college. But I think there's probably only a 2-year period of time in high school, and I may have stopped getting action figures, or maybe only picked up a handful each year. But as far as buying tons of figures, yeah, pretty much a lifelong action figure collector.
And I think that there's a really interesting point to talk about what you just mentioned, which is, that transition from from someone who bought action figures because they just liked the figures and played with the figures to the action figure collector. And I think it ties in a little bit even to what we see in terms of WWE's audience today, where the largest part of the WWE audience is the 50 plus demographic, at least for their television show. So to me, what that represents is that the people who were really big into WWE during the boom period of, whether it was the first boom period in the 80s or the second boom period, in the middle 90s, late 90s, those are the people that are still the fans today. They haven't left it, and so it's those people. Like when I was growing up, G.I. Joe was my thing, right? And it's so funny to look back and see that, like, a G.I. Joe figure was $3.99 or whatever, which really, like, explained to me now how, as a child, I was able to have so many G.I. Joes because they were. I had the original.
I'm holding up the new His tank, by the way.
Yeah, and you can see I got the Cobra Commander helmet up there.
Oh, wow.
I went and bought the helmet. But so, I was a fan of the toys back then. I was obsessed with G.I. Joe. That was my very first thing I ever collected. And nowadays, I don't collect so much, but I haven't collected for decades. But now that they have kind of these new figures coming out, and I'm at a place in my life where I can go, yes, you know what? I'll spend $20 or $30 on this figure because I want to put it on my shelf because whether it reminds me of my childhood or I think it's gonna, maybe have collector value someday. At what point did you kind of go, you know what? I like these figures because I love professional wrestling, but I think that maybe collecting them is either going to bring me some sort of monetary value in the future, or at least like status. Because I think a lot of people collect not just because they think they're going to flip them down the road. They collect for that status of like, I have the rare ones and I have this, not necessarily an investment like somebody would think. So you remember kind of where that transition took place for you?
Yeah. It's interesting, and maybe we'll touch upon this in a bit. But I feel like it's easier nowadays to transition from kid to kid collector to full-blown collector. And there's lots of areas, shades of gray in between of what play is now with social media, right? Because, if you have looked at my account and many, many other very, very talented accounts, a lot more talented people than me, like action figure photography is such a huge thing right now, right? And that's play. That's action figure play. It's posing and playing and shooting them. So it's a much easier transition to just be an action figure fan and collector now than it was when we were kids. Because, I played with them really late through high school, secretly. Of course, like I think a lot of us figure collectors may have done. And, you probably listen to the Major Wrestling Figure Pod or know of it. And those guys were the same, playing with action figures pretty much right up until they were signed with WWE. So, yeah, I think kind of video games took over for a minute. And I think, authority figures and family maybe frowned upon me still being into action figures. And it was fading. The play was definitely fading and changing. But it got to a point where, maybe a little bit of peer pressure plus, other interests, came into play and it faded for, such a brief period of time. And then I jumped in again, like I said, college years. But I think the transition kind of happened. And I'll get to the reason, I guess, in a moment here. And this ties in with my story, is I was going to college for computer science. Like I decided that's what I wanted to do. Obviously lots of encouragement from family and friends of family that's a good field to get into. So I pursued it and it was fine and I was okay. But I just saw the passion in my classmates and it wasn't there for me. And I was thinking to myself, like, I have to do this for the rest of my life like this. Like I can do it, but it's like it doesn't bring me any joy or happiness. and it just got to a point in college where, quite frankly, it was just so stressful for me, and I was very unhappy with the vision of my future, and I needed a break, And I mean, it was probably a little more dramatic than I'm making it out to be at the moment right now. But yeah, I decided I had to take a pause, so I quit. I dropped out, and I needed a break and needed to regroup myself. Feeling obviously there's a lot involved there, a lot of emotions and feelings and thoughts, and I just drove down the street to the Toys R Us and literally bought every Jakks WWE figure, one of each character that I could find, and I was all in again. And it wasn't a monetary thing because I opened them all. It was just that, like, better times, right? It's simpler times, better times, nostalgia. I think they might have had those, I forget what the line was called, but it was like a Legends-based line with like Freddie Blassie and Lou Albano and Andre the Giant. There's only a couple of them, Jimmy Snuka. So it was just like all these things, like, tying together, just like simplistic happiness, something fun, something that I enjoyed. And I just never looked back after that, and full bore insanity collecting habits.
Now, your social media presence that we kind of touched on a little bit, the action figure attack accounts and kind of showing off figures and a bit of figure photography, was that something that you were doing? I mean, social media, has really blown up for that in the last number of years, but was that something that you were kind of doing prior to the job that you have now, or did that kind of come with the territory as a way to kind of start showing off some of the products that you guys have at Mattel?
So I guess I'll continue with the journey then. And if I lose track and don't come back to this, remind me of this specific question, because it will tie into it. So, left for a while, worked, retail management jobs at like, entertainment stores like Sam Goody, if you remember that, and Virgin Megastore, and just was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And meanwhile, like, collecting was starting to gain prominence, like big time. It was the age of Marvel Legends, Toy Biz, and that transition to, Mattel, like, being like the leader in collector with their Matty collector offerings, like Masters of the Universe Classics and things like that. So all this was happening, and I'm watching like these awesome people in the industry, that, some of them know me now. I'm fortunate enough to know them, and some of them don't, but they were so open. And there's not many of them, unfortunately, but there was, a nice chunk of people who were open about the business. And I was just like absorbing it like a sponge. Like anytime they had an interview, I would listen to it, and not just for like when are we going to get, Ultimate Warrior in yellow tights and orange face paint, like that stuff is cool. And of course I wanted to hear that too, but I wanted to hear more and deeper. So, obviously Jeremy Padower, amazing. Yep. Like
on the show. Did a great episode. Yep.
Legitimate godfather of pro wrestling action figures. And I've told him this, and I'm thankful for him. So he was kind of an unknown mentor to me. Scott Knightlick, very transparent at Mattel. Ken Lilly at Palisades, great online presence, and so many others that I could touch upon now. But those guys were nice enough to be transparent with collectors, tell us what was going on, tell us how things kind of worked behind the scenes if you were willing to listen. And I decided, like, I can do this, right? Like, if these guys are doing it, like, I just need to make the attempt. So I was like, okay, what do I have to do? So I was looking into positions and qualifications, and I decided business school, was the way to go. So I went back to school and got a business degree, finished up college, and then worked for the Coca-Cola company doing marketing for two different brands at two different times for them. First, Honest Tea, a certified organic bottled tea company, and then moving on to Zico coconut water. And that job was in California. So when that came up, I was like, I'm putting in for a transfer and trying to get this job in California because I want to get into Mattel, right? So they helped me out like big time, moved me out here. And they're supportive. They wanted career growth, and they wanted people to land where they wanted to be. So I put in my time, with those companies, 5-6 years maybe. And the whole time just like trying to network, trying to do whatever I could, toy industry wise, to get my foot in the door, be respected within the collector community. And that goes back to your question that, led me to what I'm saying now is, while I was in college, I started the Action Figure Attack Instagram account. And this was after, there was MySpace, and I resisted moving on to Facebook. And then, Instagram popped up, and I resisted that. And then when I was looking at Instagram and I saw what was missing, like there was not a lot of like toy coverage. And action figure photography was in its infancy at that point. So what I started to do is virtually cover toy fairs and Comic-Cons on my account, and then eventually covered them live, specifically Comic-Con, WrestleMania Access, smaller conventions as well. And I think that's kind of how my following grew is by being one of the first or the first person to cover like action figure news on Instagram. Then transitioning eventually into action figure photography, which was great because, I'll admit I have a lot of toys and sometimes I do feel like, I'm hoarding them. But when you do photography, it makes them very purposeful again, So yeah, everything kind of came together eventually with these jobs, and kind of a miracle story happened with the Zico coconut water job, is that a former associate marketing manager came over to work for Zico. Briefly, and everyone knew I was a collector and a WWE fan, and they were like, Steve, you got to talk to this guy, and I'm going to say his name now, Dave Jackson, and he works for Jazzwares on the AEW line now, but he came over to Zico briefly, and we networked and we stayed in contact. So he left Zico, went back to Mattel, worked on the WWE line for a few more years, and decided it was time to go and move on to do something else. And he sent me a text and said, hey, are you still interested in working on this brand for Mattel? And I was like, absolutely. So I interviewed. Things went well, and I won't say their names now because they're either still with the company or recently gone, and some people like their privacy. But a lot of thanks go to the team that hired me. Yeah, it is a dream come true, and so many people to thank for Dave, who I mentioned, those unknown mentors from before, the team now who gave me the chance, and here I am 3 years into it, and it's been a insane, unbelievable, amazing experience.
That's awesome. I love that. And this
was a long time, by the way. This is like a decade or more. Yeah. So it's not like it just happened. Like some people are fortunate to get their dream job right out of college. I really had to scratch and claw my way in here, but it's worth it.
Well, and that's a great thing. I love those stories of things paying off. When I was in college, I was on the track for law school, and it was, do I do law school or do I head into professional wrestling, which I was already in a little bit, but, it wasn't my career. I wanted to make it my career. At that time, I wanted to go, work for WWE eventually, because that's anyone I think who's growing up wanting to work in wrestling. That's where you want to get. I chose the pro wrestling path and not the law school path. And most days I feel like it's worked out. And I'm definitely happy now that that's the case. But, even then, I feel like, what I'm doing now, certainly the projects and the properties that will come forth, hopefully in 2021, 2022, those are the culmination of decade plus journeys, not just something that happens overnight. So let's talk a little bit about the actual job and the position that you hold. What is it specifically that you do in this associate marketing manager position?
I run most of the lines. I am, thank God, giving some of these lines to a newer counterpart of mine, who's going to help out, because it is a lot. Like the WWE line is huge. But I kind of oversee a lot of the collector lines. So elites, basics, masters of the WWE. I'm cheating by looking behind me.
That line is so great. We'll get back to that in a little bit.
Ultimate Edition, a lot of the exclusive lines that you see at Walmart and Target. And previously, the only things I wasn't managing was some of the straight up kids lines, like the Reckon line. Even though, that we're a team and we all have input and everything, but, the day-to-day running those businesses was not under my umbrella. So yeah, it's just like being responsible for those lines, like overseeing the entire process, working with the design team and the development team and our sales counterparts, making sure items are delivered on time, ideating them, hitting our financial targets. So it's really, I think the name marketing manager, to be honest, is a little deceiving because it immediately, you think of traditional marketing things, right? But, the role used to be called brand manager. And I think that is probably more appropriate. Like I'm really essentially a brand manager for a lot of these lines on the WWE brand.
So from where you sit, you mentioned the ideation of it all. How involved are you in kind of or where in the process do you jump in on the kind of concept to completion timeline of the figures that are coming out? If Elite Set 150 is coming out now, where did you get involved? Was it the beginning, determining kind of who was going to be in it and what they were going to look like, or do you jump in farther along that timeline?
Yeah. Marketing managers manage everything, every step of the way. So day one, I have a meeting for Elites, Bill McKenna and his boss, Bill Beneke, maybe Robert Rudman, our copywriter, because he's a mega fan, like the rest of us. And we hash out what the lineups will be. And then sometimes we hash out the specific looks, or sometimes, Bill might on his own just decide, what needs to be done. And that's fine because he's obviously a veteran and a fan of all this. So yeah, day one, figuring that stuff out. Because it's very involved. It's not just like putting names on paper that you want to see made. It's managing the entire line. Like, fortunately for me, I know the entire history of the line because I've collected since day one. And Bill, we have Bill as well, who has designed since day one. So it's like that makes things a little bit easier. I can only imagine how difficult it would be for someone new to come in and have to work on something like Elites, right? Like what a monster with so much history. But yeah, managing everything, managing the relationship with the licensor with WWE. They, of course, have their requests, keeping my ears open to what the fans want, trying to make those things happen. Being mindful of the tooling budget, right? You have so much you can tool for a year, so you can't do a whole wave of completely new tooled figures. The deco comes into play. Like, can you afford this? Like, we can't have, 6 figures in a wave that are as complex as like Asuka with a robe, so it's just like deciding, all these things. And sell through, like, is this wave strong? Will it sell through? Are there other things going on? Were there retailer asks? Are there anniversaries? Like, there's so many things involved in, just that first aspect of creating a lineup.
And you mentioned what the fans want, right? Given, because I'm learning so much on the business side of action figures at this point, because up until a year and a half ago, I was solely an action figure, fan. We at Master Republic, we did our reaction figures with Super 7, but that was kind of it was a one-time thing, right? We planned some figures. It took them, a year or whatever to make them, and then they got released, and that was it. But now we're in a whole different boat with Boss Fight Studio and planning out a massive multi-year multiple products and kind of getting involved in that long process, and trying to kind of plan multiple waves that are going to come out. And then obviously we had COVID, which, backed everybody up. But just everything that you just spoke of, figuring out how to balance a line out and how do you take advantage of the tooling that's already done but not overdo it. So I guess when it comes to the fans and listening to the fans, if there is something that becomes hot, or if there's a trend that you start to notice, what is kind of the earliest that you can see that happening? You know, Austin 316 happens and okay, this is going to have to be something that we rush into production. Are you looking at this point at a 6 month, 12 month, 18 months? What is the earliest you can usually kind of act on a trend?
I mean, the average in general is about a year. Like right now I'm working on 2022 already. So a little over a year for that stuff. If something hot happens, like when Rhonda signed and when we knew we could do figures, which wasn't immediate, right? Like those deals aren't all just because someone appears on TV doesn't mean there's a deal in place for toys, right? So once we knew that we could do a figure of her, like we jumped on it and we bumped someone out of a lineup and we got her in, and I think she debuted at WrestleMania in ring for action, and we had a figure out before November. So that's kind of a little bit compressed. And we kind of knew, roughly at that point that we could do figures. So obviously she showed up at the Royal Rumble. But, things happen. Couldn't get to work right away for various reasons. But, like I said, the second we knew, we got on it and we got it out before end of year. So if something hot happens, we can bump somebody out. So I know a lot of times people get upset and they think things take a little bit too long. But I mean, you're obviously in the process now, so it's at least a year, if not more, right? So yes, we could be quicker with a lot of them, but I mean that's a strain on the system, right? So you're getting to work on things. You don't know what's going to happen, who's going to be hot. So you're planning things out, and everyone's at work over in China, here in the U.S. And you don't want to do that too often. You don't want to just blow up an entire lineup when everyone's put so much work into developing it. You can't do that all the time. So you have to pick and choose your moments. Like when an Austin 316 type event happens, you're like, okay, now's the time to use our silver bullet basically and make this happen.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that still just amazes me about the WWE lines is the sheer amount of output. I mean, I'm on the Ringside Collectibles email list, and literally it feels like at least once a week there's a new wave being announced or on sale. Obviously, that amount of output is working for you guys, or you wouldn't be putting out that amount of product. But about how many figures are you guys releasing a year? And is it something where, and expect, well, the elite line, we know, or we expect to sell X amount, and the basic line X amount. And so it's not kind of apples and oranges across all the lines, and there's expectations per kind of the type of line? Or how do you guys look at the entire kind of annual output of all the WWE lines?
You do go into it with an estimate of what you're going to do the following year. Your markets. You set your business plan. You put that in place, and then you try to achieve it. And then things happen, like COVID, right? And everything blows up in your face. And then sometimes you come out okay. Like we came out okay this year, right? Like elites are hot. They're number 1 traditional action figure in the US, and basics are number 3 traditional action figure. So, things kind of at the end of the day worked out okay for us. But the unexpected always happen. And WWE's and wrestling in general is wild. You never know what's going to happen. People could be let go, new people come into the company. It's just like something unexpected happens constantly. But yeah, you set your goals, right? You set your goals. So we know what we're going to make roughly production wise for these figures. Like we decide like, okay, we're making X amount of this wave. The next wave is going to be hitting for Easter, so maybe you make a little bit more of that one, and then once retailers come into play, that number can go up or down slightly. But yeah, all these numbers are in place at the planning stages, basically, with room for flexibility to either grow or shrink as necessary. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no, for sure. We mentioned COVID and kind of the strain it's put on the distribution side, certainly, of getting action figures made and out. Everybody's lines are behind to some extent, whether it's, months or 6 months or whatever. But the one thing that I think that we've noticed, I know that Jeremy's talked about it, others have talked about it, has been that it seems like as people have been at home, Obviously, unemployment and money, revenue, income for some people has been an issue, absolutely. But for others, it seems like maybe having more disposable income because they're not traveling, because they're not spending money on gas, because they're not whatever, has led to, over these last 9 months, really kind of a boom in collectors and buying, and even at high prices, some of the figures. You're seeing eBay auctions going way more now than they were even 9 months, a year ago. On that side of things, have you noticed anything? Do you think that that's just more of a every year things become more valuable? Have you found any kind of positive spin, at least at all, on the on COVID and what it's done for the collector side of things?
I will say, I think from a kid perspective, I think the fact that parents aren't taking their kids on vacation, that the kids are home, I think maybe parents might be more prone to buy them, more action figures or toys in general, or entertainment. So I think, I think kids are getting a bit more than maybe they would have previously. From a collector perspective, I think it's just been such a brutal year for all of us that we want that, kind of like my college story, right? Like sure. I was stressed and feeling down about everything. And I went to a go-to thing that was familiar and comforting and that I loved, and it was action figures. And I think that's what you're seeing now. And that's why you're seeing secondary market prices for older items skyrocketing. And you're seeing like people scooping up new stuff, and you're seeing like our Legends line came back this year and is doing unbelievably well, like exceeded. I mean, I pushed for it to come back and I thought it would do well, but I mean, it exceeded my expectations of how well it's actually doing. So you're seeing all this. People want that comfort, and they want the things that they love and the things that made them happy, at different parts of their lives. And then we also have a perfect storm of things. And this is, just my personal opinion, but you have the Major Wrestling Figure podcast, right? So to me, that's bringing in a lot of maybe lapsed collectors or new collectors. You have a lot of other wrestling figures in the market, right now or coming soon. And you have competition. And I think there's just like an elevated awareness of wrestling figures, and a heightened desire for them. And they're all good. You know what I mean? Like everything coming out is good. So it's just a great time to be a collector, specifically a wrestling figure collector. And you're seeing this not just, talking about wrestling figures, but you're seeing this across the board. Like the DC McFarlane line is doing really well. Marvel Legends, of course, doing fantastic. G.I. Joe is back, and that's like selling like gangbusters. It's like, you're going to war at Target trying to, that Daddy Destro. What's he actually called? That's not the name.
Profit Director Destro. Yeah,
there you go.
I limit my collecting of. It's like with wrestling figures. My rule at this point is it has to be somebody that I'm actually friends with, or that was on one of my TV shows or something, because I have to have a limit to what I spend. I have children. I'm trying to buy a new home. I have to have my limit. So, Rey Mysterio being one of them makes things complicated because there's so many Rey Mysterio variants to come out, and I'm still kind of backfilling the catalog a little bit. But beyond,
I don't know if you can catch up.
What was that?
I don't know if you can catch up with Rey figures.
No. But beyond that, so yeah, now that G.I. Joe's back, I keep cursing, that there's one more thing for me to maybe collect, but I'm very selective in what I buy. But the Profit Director Destro and the Cobra Commander helmet were must-haves for me. So
and that's the beauty, right? Is you make your own rules. Like there are no rules for collecting. Like you can keep them in package, you can open them, you can play with them, you can take photos, you can just do one character only and buy every figure of that character. Like literally you set your own rules, and that's why it's such a great hobby.
Yeah. So going back to the kind of COVID and some of the things we've seen in the industry, obviously the Toys R Us bankruptcy and the kind of traditional brick and mortar stores, across different industries, whether it's bookstores or toy stores or whatever, those were big hits and a lot of fear around the future of sales. and then COVID hit, and we weren't able to go to stores. But I know that on the WWE, just merchandise in general side, they have said that their online sales were enough to even make up for their in-arena sales. They did so much online business over the last 9 months. When it comes to the COVID era and the whatever you can tell us about your sales, have you seen kind of whether it's COVID or not, the Amazons and the big bad toy stores and the online retailers, Ringside Collectibles, really do a significant amount of sales to where it's helping kind of the impact of the loss of brick and mortar stores?
We've done great at brick and mortar this year. I mean, that can't be said globally, because everyone was affected differently, and I can't get into too many details, obviously. But yeah, we kind of did well this year. It obviously there were effects, and at various points things fluctuated. And Ringside's always been great. They're healthy. They're a great partner. Amazon, great as well. But WWE was just a resilient brand this year, like really resilient. I just think it just speaks to how strong our connection is to pro wrestling, that it wasn't affected as one may have thought it would be.
Yeah, well, that's great. Obviously, and for WWE's business overall, being in every major retailer, Walmart and Target, on down, that obviously helps, as opposed to some other lines that maybe you have are only one place or aren't at mass retail. And
I will say this before you move on, like, to me, and this is just my opinion as a collector now, I always felt as though, maybe wrestling figure collectors, like we're stuck in our ways a little bit, right? The old Matty Collector WWE Legends offerings didn't do that great on mattycollector.com. And I just felt like we wanted to find our stuff at retail, and I feel like this has maybe nudged all of us as a collector community forward a little bit to embrace online a little more. Like there were a lot of pre-sales this year that did extremely well, like Legends and Masters of the WWE Universe and Decade of Domination. And they all did really, really well. And the Rock Ultimate Edition in Amazon did extremely, extremely well. And the Ringside stuff, of course. So I think maybe this helped nudge that along and align us with, a lot of the other brands that have really been able to embrace online a little bit earlier.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that WWE Masters of the Universe crossover line. With this show kind of trying to tie into kind of some of the different aspects of licensing that Lucha Libre and pro wrestling bring to the table, one of the things that is unique, not only within wrestling, but certainly compared to a lot of entertainment brands, is we're not just dealing with the likeness or the IP of a fictional character. We're dealing with actual human beings and their likeness and their rights. Talk to me a little bit about what that process is like with you and the process of creation and licensing and approvals when it comes to the action figures that you're creating. At what point does the talent get involved? At what point do they have a say? Do you find that most of them just want to kind of see and approve? Or are there certain talents that are much more outspoken about their figures? Or does WWE just kind of make all those calls for them?
A mix of all that. So back in the day, in the Jax days, and then in the early days of Mattel, Jeremy and the powers that be at Mattel at the time were able to sign individual Legends deals on their own. Currently, that's not happening. WWE handles all those deals. So for the majority of talent, WWE handles that. Some talent do have approval rights. some may not, and it's handled via WWE. And we do get feedback back through WWE from some specific talents. And it just depends on their contract and what they want to do. And there'll be somebody who, their contract is expiring, and previously it was just maybe easy breezy approvals through WWE. And now we get word like it's going to take a little longer because they're going to have some approval rights on it. So it just depends on the deal, and we all have different responsibilities in that of when those things happen. Like there's a specific talent that I have to prepare like concepts for, like a long-term plan of what we're going to do with looks of the figures and whatnot. And I handle that early on. And then, every step of the way, then whoever else is doing their role will step in, like Bill from design will submit his things and whatnot. But yeah, it just depends on the talent really. And everyone is different. And some people are more vocal than others, or more complicated, complex, what have you. But it's interesting for sure. And, being so deep roster wise, present and past, it can make things very interesting from an approval standpoint sometimes.
I saw a debate online the other day, and then in some private messages on Facebook, not having anything to do with WWE lines, but real scan technology versus modeling. And I'm assuming at this point, some of the WWE lines are done with the real scans, and some are done with more traditional modeling. From where you sit, do you have a personal preference? Do you find that you like one versus the other? Is it just simply a matter of it's too expensive to do all real scan? I'm trying to be educated or get more educated myself on this. So I thought it was a good opportunity to ask you when I had you on.
I didn't know that some modern talent were not scanned before starting at Mattel. I thought that they were all scans, and I knew obviously legends can't be scanned because most of them don't look the same anymore. Someone sadly no longer with us, right? So those are traditional sculpts or 3D sculpts now, right? I don't have a preference because I've seen scans come out that just don't look very good, and you can't use them. And I've seen traditional sculpts that blow away scans, and I've seen images where they'll take the photo of the superstar and superimpose the sculpt on top of it, and it's just mind-blowingly good. And I've been trying to do something like at a Comic-Con of like showing this example to the fans, just to show them like how detailed these sculpts really are. Because it's one thing to see a gray model, when we debut something, but to see it, with the actual image like underneath it, transparent, is just like mind blowing. Like China was the example I was trying to make happen when we debuted China. I really wanted that, like, there were several images of her with the sculpt on top, and it just looked fantastic. So I don't have a preference. Whatever gets the job done and makes the best product. And obviously this past year, we're not scanning. You know what I mean? We're not going and scanning anyone. So there are a few traditional sculpts who maybe we would have scanned before. And we'll get back to it, and we'll just do whatever is best and whatever needs to be done. If there's somebody super hot and we got to get a figure done and make it happen, maybe we just go ahead and sculpt it, or maybe we schedule an emergency scanning session and go and just scan like 6 people to make it happen. So it all depends on the circumstances and whatever is going to make the best product.
Awesome. So before we run out of time, I definitely want to talk about this WWE Masters of the Universe crossover line because it's awesome. I have a younger brother who's 4 years younger than me, and so I kind of missed He-Man. Like he was super, super into He-Man, but like I was G.I. Joe, and He-Man came a little bit later. But I have become a huge fan of this WWE He-Man line. I think because it's so cool how you've been able to kind of take the characters and really try to find the He-Man characters for a lot of them that best kind of fit and meld with them, whether it's the Jake the Snake Roberts one or the New Day with the Tri-Head character, which is always my favorite to steal of my brothers. But obviously, when it comes to something like that, now we're talking a super classic line of toys that has its own fan base and its own IP and its own, kind of, I guess, brand managers. And then you've got the WWE side of it. So talk to me a little bit about what that process was like. Where did that idea come from? How complicated was it to kind of pitch it both ways and get the approval? And what has that process been like, kind of getting these concepts made, putting them together, and then seeking the approvals that need to happen to bring these to life?
To my knowledge, when Mattel, first pitched for the line over 10 years ago now, this was a possibility, right? It's like, what can Mattel do that's special for WWE? And this was an idea back then, right? For whatever reason, things didn't pan out. And by the way, if anyone wants to see a panel about this, my team did a panel at PowerCon last year where we went over pretty much the entire process with some great visuals and stuff of early concept art that never came to be. So that's out there if you go to the PowerCon YouTube channel. But when I started a little over 3 years ago, we were looking for a replacement for our it was called Trade Ups, internally, a Trade Ups line, which was a slightly more expensive figure, which was at the time zombies and monsters and mutants. So we had gone through several iterations of that line, and we wanted to see what was next, and we had a lot of great ideas, and for whatever reason, we couldn't get them through and make them happen. And, I went up to David Vonner, legend in the business, and I was just like, what about Motu? What if we did use the Motu classics bodies and just WWEified them, And he's like, wait a minute, let me show you something. So then he showed me this amazing concept art that he had already been working on, and maybe Magic almost worked on some of the concept work too. I can't quite remember. But I mean, it existed, right? They were already working on it. So then me and Dave, I remember him and I just throwing ideas back and forth at each other and just getting so excited. And we were like, this has to happen. This absolutely has to happen. And we were pushing for it. And some people liked it. And some people were like, I don't know, it's how it is, And it didn't work out at first. Maybe they were trying to reserve Motu for something bigger at the time. So time went by. We went in other directions. And then an opportunity came up again. And I'm all about revisiting great ideas that didn't work out from before. It's kind of how the Slammobile happened. We as a team, and then Slambulance, right? The ambulance, those things never worked out. We made them happen because we pushed for them when the time was right. So the time was right for Motu, right? So at this point, Billy, who appears in some videos, who was on the team before, he worked with Bill Beneke, the designer, to bring this to life, and we got it greenlit, and I had some input on those initial waves and initial characters. Billy then left the team to go to Jurassic, and I was fortunate enough to take over the line, and then we just went wild with it. I mean, Billy's stuff was great, and he laid the groundwork for us, and then Bill Beneke and I just had such a good time with Robert Rudman, creating these versions of the characters and their storylines and the looks and the gimmicks about them. And I do want to mention, in there somewhere, Brandon Sapitsky, he came up with the idea for using that classic He-Man body and adding some modern articulation to it. And that's actually what helped nudge us along, because an exec saw that and they were like, this has to happen, right? So that helped the stars finally align between the Origins line and the Masters of the WWE Universe line. And here we are. We're multiple waves in. Oh, there's the Rey Mysterio.
Keeping in line with my collecting all the Rey Mysterios. Still in the package, so I'm not aware of the exact articulation, but these they just came out so great. They look so good. it's just one of those things. I even like just the art, which really harkens back to that original Masters of the Universe art. Everything is just so well done to really make it feel like a blending of the two universes.
Even though it wasn't my line, I am notorious for meddling at Mattel. 'Cause I'm a collector, right? And I definitely pride myself on being, representing all you guys, all collectors on the inside, right? So like I'm on social media and the forums and the Facebook groups like all the time. So it's like, I kind of have my finger on the pulse of what I think people want. So I meddled. Like I meddled about the creation of the logo and how the packaging should be, executed, the shape of it, the classic like long style card back. The cross sell on the back, art at the top, the ring itself, I don't know if the
ring is fantastic.
The artwork on the ring, I wanted us to get the original Castle Grayskull artist to do that. It didn't work out, unfortunately, but yeah, I really meddled the whole time to make it authentic to both vintage classic WWF and Masters of the Universe. And it happened. They listened to me.
Yeah, you guys did it. Well, look, I want to thank you for your time. This has been awesome. Both the kind of education on the process there, but also, hearing your story. As I mentioned, I'm just a huge fan of people figuring out what it is that they think they want to do and then figuring out how to actually make it happen. Like that's where I was as a 12-year-old kid who's like, I want to work in pro wrestling and I'm not going to stop until I figure it out. And so I love seeing and hearing people's stories. I love the fact that you, just knew that you weren't going to be happy in computer science and decided to follow that passion. So everybody listening, if you are at all a fan of not just WWE action figures, but as Steve mentioned, the Action Figure Attack account covers more than just WWE. There's tons of great news, but also very, very first news for WWE stuff. Definitely check out Action Figure Attack on Instagram. Is it also Action Figure Attack on the other social?
To shorten it, I think it's Action Fig Attack on Twitter.
Oh yes, Twitter and their only 15 character.
But can I just say two more things if I can remember both before you sign off? The one thing is that account, what I'm doing here on the forums, etc. Like I want to be as open as possible and I want to pay it forward, right? Like these guys were open, the people I mentioned before, and inspired me and helped me get to where I am. And I'm trying to be transparent and do the same thing because I want the people who love what we do, who love pro wrestling, love action figures, whatever it is, to gain something out of me doing this now and join me in doing it here or elsewhere or doing something similar. So really, please listen, and take in these things. And if you love it, join us, and come do this because, in entertainment and these passionate things that we all love, we need more people who really love them doing it with us. And we're just going to make it better and better. So please, if you're inspired and you want to do this, follow your dreams and do this. And the other thing I want to say is, I don't know if you've seen that comic of, it's like two strips of a guy like digging, right, towards like a treasure at the end. And the top one is a guy defeated and he just gave up and you can see the treasure like inches away, but he gave up and he walked away. And the guy on the bottom is the guy who kept digging and is about to hit it. And I was almost the guy at the top. I was defeated and I almost gave up. And then literally as I was about to move back to the East Coast is when things came together for Mattel for me. So don't give up. So if you want to do this, do everything you can to make it happen. Be smart, obviously, but learn everything you can. And please join us here and help us, bring the things we love to the next generation.
Well, that's awesome. That is great advice. I think I read something the other day that started going around social media about the guy who created the Queen's Gambit, hit on Netflix, and how it's been seen by 62 million people this year, but it took him 30 years to get that story made. 9 rewrites because everyone's like, chess, boring, never gonna happen, And the moral obviously is, if you are passionate about something, keep pushing for it. Like you said, be smart about it, and but keep pushing for it. So again, I really thank you for your time, Steve. This has been great. The work that's being done at Mattel is just awesome right now. And like you said, I think we are in a renaissance of wrestling figures, action figures, between the lines that are out now, the lines that are coming out over the next year. And it's a fantastic time to be a wrestling fan and a collector. The fact that most of these figures are on the same scale relatively also is super cool. And so, I thank you again, and we'll have people check you out. If you guys want to find Steve, we'll put all his social media links in the comments or in the notes section here of the show. And we'll be back next time with more from the business of the business.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Lucha-masks.com, in partnership with Mask Republic, give you personal protective masks to keep you lucha strong in the fight versus COVID-19. With world-class luchadors Blue Demon Jr., the Lucha Brothers, LA Park, Ultimo Dragon, Cain Velasquez, Conan, and so much more. Head to lucha-masks.com and you too can become a masked warrior. Lucha-masks.com, powered by Pro Wrestling Revolution.